everybody. Welcome to the Capitalism Workshop. My name is Tanner Merlis, and I'm one of the organizers of tonight's event, which is supported by the Center for Social Justice and the Socialist Project, two Toronto-based organizations working to rebuild, add to, support, and sustain left educational and political infrastructure. So before we get into tonight's main event, an acknowledgement and a quick few announcements. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. The Center for Social Justice and the Socialist Project are opposed to the forces and relations that continue to undermine and erase Indigenous peoples. And we publish works by Indigenous authors and their allies to show solidarity with historic, present, and future anti-colonial struggles by Indigenous peoples for self-determination here and everywhere. So it's really great to see such an incredible turnout for tonight's session, which is a celebration and preview of the new book, Inhuman Power, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Capitalism, authored by Nick Dyer-Witheford, Atle Kjøsen, James Steinhoff, and published by Pluto Press earlier this year. Now, it would not be an exaggeration to say that Inhuman Power is the best new book, perhaps the best book on artificial and capitalism available today. This is not just my humble opinion, but an assessment shared by some of the world's leading Marxian political economists of communication. Christian Fuchs lauds the book as, quote, an indispensable reading for all those who want to understand the relationship between artificial intelligence and capitalism. Nick Cernicek says, quote, it's an exemplary contribution to understanding how machine learning is changing our world. Of Marxism and philosophy, Bruce Robinson describes the book as, quote, a step forward in Marxist accounts of AI that raises a number of important issues for debate, particularly in its challenge to both Marxism and to the dominant assumptions on the left about what's to be done about AI. Outside of our fold, the book is also receiving many laudatory reviews. Writing for the Literary Review of Canada, Brendan Howley, a former investigative journalist of white-collar crime for the Fifth Estate, says that Inhuman Power, quote, powerfully suggests there are shifting tectonic plates when it comes to what AI can and might do, and tellingly, why it might do it. It's a book that reveals the cauldron of problems that arise when the politics of digital hypercapitalism slams into the working lives of actual human beings. Howley says this is, quote, one of those books that people will look back on 20 years from now and say, yeah, they got that right. Clearly, the book is a must-read, and it can be purchased at the front of the room for $25 a copy, and that's a special discounted rate for you in attendance tonight, or you can grab it online at Pluto Press's website. In any case, we are incredibly pleased to have all three of Inhuman Power's authors with us tonight to help us understand how AI fused with capitalism portends a disturbing picture of capitalism's future, and how we might think through what's to be done in response to those dystopian future projections. Nick Dyer-Witheford is an associate professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at the University of Western Ontario. Nick's the author of Cyber Marx, Cycles and Circuits of Struggle and High Technology Capitalism, and Cyber Proletariat, Global Labor and the Digital Vortex. Nick is also the co-author of Games of Empire and Cyber War and Revolution. Atle Kjøsen is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at the University of Western Ontario. He researches and has written on Marxist value theory, media theory, logistics, acceleration, and artificial intelligence. And James Steinhoff is a PhD candidate, and I think your defense is scheduled for Monday, so let's be very nice to James tonight, at the University of Western Ontario. He is currently preparing to defend his dissertation, which is critiquing the post-Operaismo theory of immaterial labor. So tonight's event will proceed like this. Nick's going to give you the broad overview of the work, and then James and Atle will dig a little deeper and give you some sort of more intricate assessments of AI and capitalism. After the formal presentation portion is done, we're going to have a participatory audience Q&A. I'll kick things off with a question, then I'll open it to the floor for questions and answers that go about 35 minutes or so. Then after that, I hope we all cheers and be merry. But without further delay, let's give a warm welcome to our special guests, Nick, Atle, and James.
Thanks very much, Tanner. It's truly a pleasure to be here. And thank you to the Capitalism Workshop, to Tanner, to Greg, and everyone else involved in organizing this event. James and Atle and I are truly appreciative of it. As Tanner said, to present the work, we are going to divide the labor. I will start with a whirlwind summary of our overall argument, and then James and Atle will drill down into, in greater depth, to a couple of important, and we hope provocative, issues. I think it's fair to say that we wrote this book in order to disturb leftist and specifically Marxist discussions of AI, which we believe are often complacent, although in strangely contradictory ways. Our initial assumption is that we are currently in already existing AI capitalism. Everyone here, I'm sure, has heard of recent advances in artificial intelligence through new technologies of machine learning, which I'm not going to attempt to explain here, although we do in the book. Equally, I think everyone has probably had some exposure to the slew of constant news stories about these advances in artificial intelligence, some of them breathless celebrations of financial robo-trading, ad writing algorithms, or machine learning driven voice recognition, McDonald's drive-thrus, others of them more bemused and resentful commentaries on the non-appearance yet of autonomous vehicles predicted to be here yesterday. You also probably have some sense of the mainstream, shall I say, bourgeois debate about AI. A now highly choreographed exchange between what we might term AI apocalyptics, mainly computer scientists, predicting an imminent crisis of work caused by technological unemployment, who are pitted against their economist counterparts, business as usual theorists, who suggest that capitalism can absorb the impact of AI with a bit of educational upgrading and vocational retraining, just as it absorbs the impact of previous industrial revolutions. The debate that we address, however, is one within Marxism about what artificial intelligence might mean both for capital and for prospects of communism. And we distinguish not two, but three positions: minimalist, maximalist, and what we term an abyssal position. I'll go on to break down this last abyssal position, which we indicate after I said a little bit about the other two, which we criticize, albeit in a comradely way. So the minimalist position is basically a Marxist deflation of claims about the radicalism of artificial intelligence and of predictions of an impending crisis of work. It has several interlaced strands. For example, it usually suggests that AI is massively hyped, overlooking intractable, persistent problems in the technology, for example, that of getting robots to match human fine motor dexterity. It emphasizes that the end-of-work claims of AI futurists are undercut by AI developers' own reliance on legions of low-wage, online gig economy ghost workers tagging and cleaning data required for machine learning and moderating its subsequent deployment. The minimalist position also emphasizes that capital's successive industrial revolutions have always involved both the expulsion and accumulation of proletarians. Even as old industries are destroyed and workers discarded, new industries and new proletariats are created by the advancing frontiers of commodification. And to these points are sometimes added a more conjunctural analysis. What governs technological innovation is clearly not simply its scientific possibility, but also its commercial profitability. And today, capital's preference for short-term speculative gains prevent deep AI investment, so the minimalists claim. Each of these threads of analysis is distinct, but they are generally woven together to suggest that there is little or nothing in artificial intelligence today that revises the classic Marxist analysis of machines offered in chapter 15 of Capital as a supplement to the value-generating power of labor. Hence, there is little in AI itself to alter the communist strategies or tactics. In an inversion of the bourgeois business-as-usual theory, it says simply, the struggle continues. Diametrically opposite to this is the maximalist Marxist position. This holds that AI is indeed for real, and, they say, offers great possibilities of human liberation. This is basically the left accelerationist vision. It has classic Marxist roots in the idea that capitalism will be destroyed by the tension between the forces and relations of production. And it also, of course, draws on the famous fragment on machines in Marx's Grundrisse, passage beloved by post-Operaismo theorists, which appears to predict the ultimate dissolution of the wage form by automation. I think many of you here will be familiar with some of the main texts of this tendency. Nick Cernicek and Alex Williams' Inventing the Future, Paul Mason's Post-Capitalism, Aaron Bastani's Fully Automated Luxury Communism. I would say that it is a form of AI apocalypticism, but with a communist or at least a socialist twist. It says that the fourth industrial revolution will bring a crisis of work, and that that's a good thing, because a crisis of work is a crisis of capitalism. This line of thought is also, in a way, a digital era successor to Lenin's famous enthusiasm for the assembly line as the most recent in capitalist technologies of his age, and his definition of communism as the Soviets plus electricity. Albeit today with one important difference. The maximalist AI position dispenses with political revolution, substituting an evolutionary path to post-capitalism. Paid work would be progressively replaced by either a universal basic income, UBI, or a comprehensive range of universal basic services in an incremental technological erosion of capital. In contrast, our position is abyssal. We think that the minimalists make strong points about the near-term limits to AI adoption, but it understates the recent improvements in machine learning, the cumulative momentum of lowering computation costs and big data networking, and of the recursive application of AI to its own development. Although we are today only in an initial state of actually existing AI capitalism, we can clearly discern how leading AI oligopolists, Google, Amazon, IBM, Baidu, Alibaba, and the like, aim to establish artificial intelligence as a general condition of production, a prerequisite of industrial activity, just as steam and railways were in the 19th century, or electricity and mass transport to the 20th century. James is going to say more about this in just a moment. But unlike the maximalists, we think that the results of this capitalist phase change would not be progressive. On the contrary, we see AI affecting a major decomposition of the working class that both discards workers and disempowers those who continue to work without any decomposition of capital, which will not conveniently automate itself out of existence, but on the contrary, consolidate an increasingly machinic ascendancy. Now, this is heterodox Marxism, but not without scriptural basis. Our title, of course, is from the 1844 manuscripts, In the End, an Inhuman Power Rules Over Everything. Now, perhaps we unfairly extend this aphorism about the logic of the market to the current technological incarnation of that logic in AI. But there are other passages of Marx, such as his account in the so-called unpublished sixth book of Capital, now extensively published, where he deals with capitalism's real subsumption of production via technoscience, or his later allusions to capital as an automatic subject, where he seems to put his toe in the nightmare waters where we have gone swimming. So let me break down three circles of what we see as the abyss of artificial intelligence. First, we see AI today intensifying changes already underway in the nature of work. It is intensifying precarity and the capacity of capital to treat labor as a plug-and-play component within production systems, as demonstrated not only by the armies of ghost workers used in AI's own production, but also in machine learning-driven algorithmic management systems in gig economy enterprises such as Uber and Deliveroo. Artificial intelligence is also intensifying workplace monitoring in terms of effective and biometric sensing, monitoring that is only part of a wider deepening of panoptic surveillance capacities typified by facial recognition technologies. AI is also currently intensifying the polarization of the workforce between high-end software programmers and engineers who are doing the AI automating, and low-end service workers, gendered and racialized, who are, for the moment, too cheap to automate. This polarization is classically demonstrated by San Francisco's ongoing F-off Google protests. Furthermore, AI's approach is heralded by increasing educational costs for the upgrading and lifelong learning by which people are meant to survive the fourth industrial revolution. For example, by dubious computer boot camps for blue-collar programming. Additionally, AI is integral to the algorithmically targeted dis- and misinformation campaigns whose disastrous results have been so apparent recently in the Trump election and in Brexit. This trajectory of precarity, panopticism, polarization, pedagogical confusion, and propaganda are not new, but AI is accelerating tendencies already destructive of working class political capacities. Second, in the longer term, while mainstream AI apocalyptics seem to be wrong about a sudden onset crisis of work, there are real prospects that AI adoption will, in more gradual and oblique ways, attenuate and hollow out the wage-labor relation, not to the advantage of laborers. We tend to see it as a slow tsunami in which waves of technological unemployment, ratcheting in sync with business cycles and financial crises, will be a part, as will various intermediate phases of job replacement, in which, for example, truck drivers ride shotgun on convoys of automated vehicles, or diminishing call center staff fill the gaps in banks of algorithmic answering services. But this is not the whole story. Under capitalism, people have to sell their labor power to avoid total immiseration. So even as automation advances, they will seek employment and find exploitation, or seek self-employment and find self-exploitation in increasingly baroque forms of service work. But labor will be recurrently contingent, de-skilled, and disposable, controlled by programs that are opaque and at a certain level incomprehensible even to their developers. Its human elements will be increasingly peripheral to both production and profit. The issue may not be as much joblessness as powerlessness, not worker autonomy, but the increasing autonomization of capital from workers. Third, and most controversially, we aim to confiscate what Marxism imagines as its ace up the sleeve in AI discussions, and challenge the belief that extreme automation would necessarily result in capital's self-dissolution. We argue that it is possible to conceive of a fully automated capitalism. Now, this would require not the narrow, limited, domain-confined forms of artificial intelligence that exist today, but the attainment of the holy grail of AI research, artificial general intelligence, or human equivalent AI. We emphasize that we are not at, or probably even near, this stage. But if we engage in a sort of science fiction thought experiment and imagine artificial general intelligence as attained, we see no reason other than a lingering humanist vitalism in Marxism to hold that it could not generate surplus value. Now, value theorists will, of course, pounce on this statement for crassly overlooking the form of the value relation based on the sale of the commodity labor power, and say that an AI capitalism would in fact not be capitalism at all, because it would be a rentier order based solely on machine ownership. But we posit that artificial general intelligence machines could sell their activities, functionally equivalent to labor power, to capitalists that might themselves be AIs. We could even envisage a form of capital that, in its drive to productivity, propels itself into a situation where the class struggle continues, but is entirely in machinic form, with the positions of both capitalist and proletarian occupied by AIs. The struggle would indeed continue, class struggle Silicon squared. To cite Kafka, there is infinite hope, but not for us. Atle will have more to say on this. We draw three conclusions from this descent into the AI abyss. First, we observe today social rebellions underway that, even though not specifically against AI, array themselves around it, so that the AI issue is becoming a sort of invisible attractor for emergent tumults. We speak of a heptagon of struggles, although we're not actually religious about the number of sides this polygon has. If we choose to posit a dodecahedron of struggles in this discussion, that's fine. But for the moment, we specify strikes against gig economy precarity, Silicon Valley worker revolts against digital militarism, anti-surveillance movements, social media defection, opposition to algorithmic biases, contestation of smart cities, an issue, of course, very well known to Toronto because of sidewalk labs, techlash against digital oligopolies. We note that all of these are not, as left accelerationists might suggest, movements with demands for full automation now. On the contrary, they are movements to refuse or revise drastically AI's automating and monitoring tendencies. Communists should align with these movements. Second, we reject the idea that capitalist-led AI development will open the door to socialism. And that includes capitalist-led AI regulated by social democrats. We are critical of the AI plus universal basic income or universal basic services formula. In our view, the enthusiasm with which the idea of UBI has been embraced by the AI moguls of Silicon Valley warns us that this proposal is perfectly set for the stabilization of an oligopolistic capitalism in which the means of production remain firmly in private hands, while surplus or semi-surplus populations are put on a maintenance regime. We think that much of what is being advanced as post-capitalism is precisely the sort of state-incentivized development that would be required for a full AI capitalism to come into being. Third, and finally, a communist program on artificial intelligence has to rest on collective, socialized direction of techno-scientific research directions. At the moment, AI research with vast social consequences is, even in its military aspects, fundamentally directed by capital. This should be replaced by informed, layered, complex, transparent public mechanisms of control over AI funding, research agendas, and deployment. Moreover, a communal decision-making on AI development should not be limited to the question of what types of AI to foster, but include the issue of how far, or indeed if at all, it should be pursued and prioritized as a social project. We do not foreclose on the possibilities of a deep communist redesign of artificial intelligence, but nor do we take its possibility for granted. There are on the horizon two singularities: the capitalist techno-singularity and the communist social singularity. Both may seem improbable. We should not declare either impossible, but nor should we assume their compatibility. And now I will hand over to James and Atle to give us some depth to this skimming account. I'm going to pass first James. James, who will speak about AI and the general conditions of production.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming out. I'm going to provide some detail about the argument of chapter 1 specifically, which is called Means of Cognition. Nick mentioned that in passing. And so this chapter looks at AI in the near future and today, right? It's political economy analysis. And the argument of this chapter is that the capitalist producers of AI are positioning AI as a new kind of infrastructure, or part of what Marx called the general conditions of production more broadly, right? So the significance of this AI as infrastructure is that AI is being directed by capital not only towards the automation of work, which is the traditional focus of Marxist analysis, right? But instead, AI is being positioned as something that can augment and automate social existence as such. So AI capital is imagining a near future where production, but life more generally as well, presuppose AI, which is cheaply, widely available via some sort of infrastructural network in a way that electricity or internet access is today. So except instead of pure energy coming out or web access, you would have on-demand machine cognition capabilities for perception, machine vision, that sort of thing, or certain forms of cognition, pattern recognition, predictive analytics, that sort of thing. So we actually argue in the book that this future they're projecting is quite feasible. But how could AI become something like electricity? It's a very good question, right? Well, so there are ongoing increases in computational power and network speeds are enabling AI to be distributed via the cloud, right? Tech giants like Google and all of the big ones are selling AI as a service in which computing's done in the vast data centers they have and is piped out and embedded in applications or websites, right? It's an on-demand thing. And while the digital smartness that can be piped out right now is very narrow, task-based tools like an image recognition app or a translation app or whatever, we speculate that ongoing advances in AI in computational power are going to make more diverse functions available and cheaper, right, and faster. So that's how. But why? is the second question you might ask. Why is Capital positioning AI in this way? So we approach this question by imitating Marx's analysis of the Industrial Revolution or its effects that you can see in Capital Volume 1, Chapter 15, the machine chapter, right? So, got one Marx block quote for my talk, only one, right? Marx says, large-scale industry had to take over the machine itself, its own characteristic instrument of production, and to produce machines by means of machines. It was not till it did this that it could create for itself an adequate technical foundation and stand on its own feet. In other words, it was only when machines became able to produce machines that machinery as such became part of the general conditions of production, i.e., or in other words, a presupposition for production occurring at all, right? Capital underwent a qualitative technological shift around this point with the wide availability of machine-produced precision parts. So our argument in this chapter is that AI is being positioned in an analogous way as a necessary technology to help an increasingly computational capitalism stand on its own feet. And if you look at the discourse of the AI producers, there's good reason to believe this. For instance, Microsoft has stated that limited human cognitive capacities are a fundamental constraint on their operations. That's an exact quote, fundamental constraint. Right? There's simply too much data, and human capacities to perceive and process it are insufficient to the needs of cybernetic capitalism. So AI Capital's attempts to position AI as a upcoming general condition of production are often advanced under the benevolent sounding activity of democratizing AI. So you have Google, you have Amazon, Microsoft, you have Chinese AI companies such as Baidu, all getting on board with this language, right? And what these programs amount to in our analysis are efforts to automate the production of AI, right? We have one click, we have end-to-end machine learning solutions now on offer from all of the AI producers. Now, while there is certainly merit in allowing access to AI technology to unskilled, non-technical people, this democratization of AI is simultaneously an operation of de-skilling the high-skilled labor that goes into producing AI and machine learning, and to make those skills directly available to capital, or so we argue. At the end of this chapter, we suggest that calling this possible infrastructural future of AI with the snazzy term means of cognition. This means generally available AI-powered capacities for machine cognition and perception. And we use that term, means of cognition, to establish a connection with the means of communication, the means of transportation, which Marx in Volume 2 of Capital cites as essential preconditions for capitalist production occurring at any given place and time, right? So, second point of the chapter is a polemic against other forms of Marxism. And so it might sound, by using this terminology, means of cognition, that we are endorsing some variety of post-Operaismo, post-workerism, cognitive capitalism theory, such as Hartenegri, Espouse, or Jan Moulier Boutang, or Paulo Virno. But that's not the case at all. In fact, we believe that the argument we put forth in this chapter actually directly contradicts a central component of such kinds of Marxian thought, and specifically their formulation of the concept of the general intellect. Comes up in the fragment on machines, right, frequently cited these days. So the general intellect concept is essential to especially the left accelerationists or the maximalist position on AI that Nick just outlined, and how capital will wither away in the face of technological advancement. But the general intellect originates in Marx, right? In the Grundrisse, and Marx is in that context speculating on highly automated future capitalism, in which, quote, general social knowledge becomes a, quote, direct force of production. And the conditions of social life, he says, come under control of this general intellect. Now, we argue in the book that general intellect, on our reading, here refers to capital's ever-increasing manifold of skills and knowledge which it captures from human labor and embodies in machine form. Right? This is arguably how something, knowledge or skill, can be socialized, is by embodying it into a technical object which can be distributed. Post-Operaismo thinkers have argued for a sort of inversion of the general intellect as the communicative and creative capacities of networked humans, which simply can't be captured by machines. And since capital cannot capture these capacities, they argue that in this cybernetic age, labor is going to gain power and develop towards a new state of autonomy from capital. This is the central argument of Hart Negri, if you've ever read it, right? But we argue that Marx's original conception of the general intellect as capital's accrued technological abilities looks much more accurate if we take into account this positioning of the means of cognition, or the democratization of AI. And we outline in the chapter many ways in which AI is already impinging upon these capabilities which are purportedly not automatable if we listen to post-Operaismo. So in closing, this chapter suggests that the post-Operaismo humanist version of the general intellect does not describe the state of currently existing AI capital, nor can it really grapple with the possibility of AI advancing beyond its current state. And in fact, it also inflates the powers of a technologically subjugated working class, while simultaneously underestimating the actual increasing powers of technological capital. Thanks.
All right, so I'm going to cover the abyssal part of the book, which is the third chapter, called Perfect Machines in Human Labor. And in this chapter, we discuss the potential drastic implication, as Nick has already alluded to, of the potential emergence of artificial general intelligence, or AGI, which I'm going to just refer to here. So AGI, artificial general intelligence. So existing AI is of the narrow variety, meaning that they're focused on solving very narrowly constrained tasks, like recommending the next song, on Spotify, or the next video on YouTube, translating languages, or playing a game like Go or chess or something like that. EGI, however, their system with sufficiently broad scope and strong generalization capabilities, meaning that they should be able to transfer knowledge from one problem or context to the other. And therefore, they can actually perform a variety of tasks in very diverse and very unfamiliar situations. So this means that they're not just kind of anchored to a very particular task that they have to perform, but then they can kind of do more or less almost anything, or at least a wide variety of tasks like humans. One of the things we address in the book is that this technology doesn't actually exist, and some doubt that it even is possible. But as we note, it is considered sufficiently plausible to actually attract investment for some of the big giants of capital. So Google, for instance, they recently, or a couple of years ago, bought DeepMind. Elon Musk is a strong supporter of OpenAI. Uber has its own Uber AI, where they're trying to generate artificial general intelligence, I presume, for their autonomous vehicles. And Microsoft recently purchased the AGI from Maluba. So given the non-existence of this technology, but despite its plausibility, what we do in the third chapter is more or less this science fictional thought experiment that Nick explained. What would actually happen to the capitalist production, but also what would happen to humanity and kind of a role in the capital production if AGI were to be created. So many people believe, and we're talking now about the side of capital, believe that if such a technology were to be invented, it would be the coming of the technological singularity. And this is this hypothetical moment during when technological change happens so fast that human life will be irreversibly changed. Ray Kurzweil, futurist and transhumanist, is probably the most well-known proponent of this view. And he argues that, quote, "This epoch will transform the concepts that we rely on to give meaning to our lives, from our business models to the cycle of human life, including death itself." It's very interesting that he mentions business model first, right? Death will be conquered, but the capital production will prevail, right? So this idea that everything will change but for the economic system was a significant, although it's kind of like an unstated influence in our chapter. So in that sense, we're kind of making a Marxist version of Kurzweil's argument about the technological singularity. So what we're doing by kind of doing this Kurzweil Marxist argument is that we're going against what is now, I would say, an orthodox interpretation of the fragment of machines that both Nick and James has mentioned. This is also, the quote that the left accelerationist and luxury automated communists, latch their faith and hopes onto, right? So in this fragment of machines, Marx argues that with increasing application of science and technology, capital is basically pushing labor to the side of production, and hence, quote, "labor in the direct form ceases to be the great wellspring of wealth, hence labor time must cease to be its measure, and hence exchange value of use value." Meaning, given that human labor is the source of all value, the complete automation of production is the end game of capitalism. But AGI is such a special case of capitalist technology that we question not only the conclusion of Marx, but also the left accelerationist and fully automated luxury communist belief that capitalism will just automate itself out of existence. But then why do we make such an argument? How can we actually make such an argument? And this is where we kind of become quite heterodox. It's actually not heretical. Because what we argue in the chapter is that the very concept of AGI actually bears a striking resemblance to how Marx actually understands and defines key concepts like labor and labor power. So we posit that AGI are machines that could not just potential labor, but they could also potentially create surplus value. And this is a heterodox argument then, because we are critiquing Marx's anthropocentric assumption that, quote, "labor is an exclusively human characteristics," end quote. And that the capacity to labor exists only basically in the physical form or in the living personality of a human being. And Marx actually takes great pains at qualifying labor as human. And he does this partly to dispel the fetish of capital, that it and its machinery is a source of value next to land and labor. But Marx, arguably also firmly believes that labor is human because he anchors the capacity to labor in the human species. And he explicitly defines labor against the productive activity of animals. So, for example, in a famous passage from Capital, the bees and the architect's passage, he argues that while the honeycomb cells of bees may put to shame the work of many architects, what, quote, "distinguishes the worst of architects from the best of bees," end quote, is that the human architect's labor is an act of creativity and imagination. They're capable of building structures in the mind before constructing them in wax. But there's the thing, what if machines actually were creative? What if they could imagine doing something and then actually do it? Would they then be capable to perform labor? So one example we refer to in the book, among many others, is DeepMind. As I mentioned, this company was purchased by Alphabet, Google's parent company, a couple of years ago, and they created AlphaGo. And AlphaGo is actually narrow AI, right? But it's seen as a very significant stepping stone, perhaps towards something like AGI. So this narrow AI learned how to play the ancient Chinese game called Go, and it learned it so well that it beat the world champion, a Korean named Lee Sedol, 4-1 in a match way back in the March of 2016. The reason why I say way back is that there are just so many more developments in this field after that. So the AI field has changed quite drastically. And a striking example of machine creativity and imagination is the 37th move in the second game against Atle. So this move was so original and counterintuitive to the human commentators watching this match that they thought the neural network had made a mistake. It also shook Atle, who took an unusually long time to respond. Google's engineers, they figured out what had happened afterwards. And what they had done by kind of doing like an fMRI scan of the neural network was that AlphaGo had calculated the probability of a human making this move 37 at that time at 0.010%, or just 1 in 10,000 chance. But after deliberating for a while, the neural network made the move anyway. So we see this as not only a creative, but arguably also, something that this machine actually imagined before doing. So already, when we're in the level of narrow AI, we can start to challenge some of the assumptions that Marx makes about labor and what he thinks is unique about humans. So in that kind of sense, like we're decidedly not anti-humanist, but we critique a lot of humanist accepted notions. Right? But there's the thing. Just because a machine, or for that matter animal, can do something a human can do, that doesn't actually mean that they can labor. So we're not saying that when AlphaGo did this, it was actually laboring. It was not. It's just a machine. It's something came up with it. Because according to Marx, being capable of labor is not just about doing this one particular task or another particular task. It is actually having this general capacity to labor, to doing many different things, right? You might have a PhD, but then you get a job at Starbucks selling coffee, right? I mean, you can do a lot of different things, or you can work for Uber or something like that. We can do a lot of different things, right? So it's not just this or that activity, but many different ones. Hence why Marx refers to general human labor and a general capacity to labor. Right? So whereas animals are limited by an involved environmental specific intelligence and machine learning systems are narrowly constrained by the tasks they were built for, humans can put their minds and hands to almost anything. So while AlphaGo can play Go and come up with new styles of playing it, and this, moves that have been called like the God's touch and a bunch of different things, it cannot actually use this knowledge to play chess. It cannot use this knowledge to play another variant of Go, understand English, or drive a car. Whereas, learning and doing new things is something that humans do quite easily at a very young age, and when you also don't require as much data as these machine learning systems require, right? And this is because we are generally intelligent. We are not like general intelligence in the sense that we can do everything, we can't fly and these kind of things, but we have a degree of general intelligence that make us capable of reasoning across multiple domains of knowledge, multiple domains of production, and doing various tasks. Right? And this is the reason why only human beings can labor, at least how we interpret Marx. So even though we disagree with this sharp division between humans and animals, we do end up kind of accepting that yes, it is only human beings that can labor in this day. But by making this argument, we're actually updating Marx's concept of labor and labor power. So we are anchoring it to this threshold of general intelligence. But by doing this, we are theoretically opening up the door for another being than the human to come in and labor in the capitalist mode of production. Because if general intelligence is tied to the capacity to labor, an artificial general intelligence could, almost by definition, labor. But does that mean that an AGI automatically could produce surplus value? No, it doesn't. Because labor is just the necessary, but not the sufficient condition for someone being able to create value. As Marx argues, surplus value can only be created by capital, quote, entering into exchange with the worker. Meaning value creation is based on capitalist ration production. Specifically, that the capacity to labor, like everything else in our societies, is a commodity, and it's a commodity then that the worker can and must sell to a capitalist in order to survive. And obviously, after buying this commodity, the capitalist exploits the worker by making her work for longer than it takes to produce commodities of equivalent value to what she is paid in wages. But this means that if AGI were to create value, they must become proletarians. Right? Because if they just labor in a production process but are not paid a wage, they would effectively be slaves. And as Marx argues in Grundrisse, quote, in the slave relation, the worker is nothing but a living labor machine. So we do spend some time on Marx's understanding of slavery in the book. So this means that if an AGI was employed in a production process, but employed by but not getting a wage, they would still be functionally equivalent to machines and animals. So this means that being a legally free, property-owning subject that is compelled to work for a wage, or doubly free worker, to use one of Marx's sarcastic quips, is basically a social condition for creating value. So while only human beings can do this now, theoretically it actually matters nothing or very little to capital whether the subject that can sell the labor power to capital, where that subject resides in a human, synthetic, or metallic body. So, interestingly, Marx actually seems to suggest that a machine becoming its stark opposite, becoming capable of laboring, becoming a living labor, is actually possible. And we are kind of hitching our argument onto this obscure passage from the Grundrisse that Marx actually, where he discusses something quite boring, maintenance of fixed capital and machinery. But he writes, quote, if machinery lasted forever, if it did not itself consist of transitory material, which must be reproduced, and then in brackets he writes, quite apart from the invention of more perfect machines which would rub off it the character of being a machine, and quote, if it were perpetuum mobile, then it would most completely correspond to its concept. So the reference to perpetual motion machines can be taken to refer to something like a von Neumann-like self-reproducing automata that can never actually break down due to making copies of itself. But what is written in the bracket is far more interesting, and it's like weird kind of quip and aside that Marx inserts there. And it's interesting because he kind of speculates on machines that are so perfect that they're no longer machines. And this kind of usage of the words perfect machines is something I've tried to look into, but I haven't found a definitive answer. But a lot of times during the time, perfect machines were actually used to refer to human beings, that human beings were actually perfect machines. So when Marx is saying here, invention of more perfect machines, he is more or less alluding to our modern concept of the android that we see in a show like Westworld or the movie Ex Machina, right? So, if a machine's character of being a machine is robbed off of it, it arguably means that it negates its own being as fixed capital and becomes its opposite, basically a worker, a living laborer. So we argue that AGI is an example of the perfect machine that Marx is alluding to in this aside. But that for them to actually become capable of producing value, they would have to be proletarianized, meaning they would have to be forced to sell the labor power for a wage in order to survive. So imagine an Uber autonomous vehicle that is capable of purchasing its own gas, electricity, repairs, parts, and deployed as a machinic self-employed contractor, paid a wage for the cost of its own auto-reproduction. In such a situation, the capital proletarian relation continues, but in an entirely machinic register, as Nick has pointed out. Or as an order in which human workers only retain relevance if augmented to operate at AI speed. So this is where we kind of make a kind of transhumanist argument, kind of following what Elon Musk and Kjøsen are saying. Not necessarily embracing it, we're saying, if we want to keep up and, still be relevant in the labor market, we would have to, upgrade our brains with chips so we can think faster, or so that we wouldn't necessarily have to sleep or, engage in other kind of superfluous activities like, eating and defecating, etc. So here we then come to the ground of what is known as the reconfiguration debate. Can we actually reconfigure capitalist technology for communist ends, right? So on the ground of this reconfiguration debate as to how far technosystems developed by capital can be repurposed for socialist or communist ends, and how far they have capitalism's logics, as it were, baked into them. And we have to consider the proposition posed with a quite different inflection from right accelerationists, such as the quite racist Nick Land, that AI, as a technosystem aimed at the liquidation of labor and the acceleration of circulation, may actually have a teleological identity with capital. They're meant to kind of come together at a point, which is the singularity. AGI is a research program that has deeply embedded within it the aspiration to develop a silicon successor species that might more efficiently pursue endless accumulation. It is far from clear that this is either required for or reconcilable with a communist program of de-alienation and emancipation of humanity. So AI, alongside global warming, brings us to the limit of Marxism as a project of high modernity. for it presents the prospects of techno-innovations that make humanity obsolete and or turned into a species of transhumans working for a wage until the heat death of the universe. Okay, that's it.
Thank you very much, Nick, James, and Atle, for that rich overview of the work and somewhat depressing conclusion. I'm hoping that in the Q&A session we can think about what might be done in response to the problems the book identifies and responds to.